Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Chris O'Flaherty. I'm a product specialist here with Oculus, and tonight we have a two-part webinar. I will be discussing the features and benefits of the Oculus Easyfield C, hopefully to give you some information that will help you increase your return on investment with the device. And we also have special guest medical billing and coding specialist and CEO of AICore, Mr. Rob Rebello, here to discuss reimbursements with visual field testing, as well as a topic that's on everybody's mind, ICD-10 and the transition from ICD-9 to ICD-10. I'd like to point out that there is a text box on the right of your screen for questions, and I'd encourage you to ask questions during the webinar, and we'll try and have a short Q&A session following. So I'll start with talking about a little bit about Oculus history. Oculus is a family-owned company that it's been in business for 120 years, and currently Oculus produces over 100 eye care products out of their state-of-the-art facility in Wetzlar, Germany. Here's some of the common products we have here in the United States. And in the United States, we have 3 visual fields that are available. We have the full field, full 90-degree perimeter, the Oculus Twin Field 2. We have the 70-degree perimeter, the Center Field 2. And then we have the topic for this evening, the Easyfield, which is a 30-degree static perimeter. So why do we perform visual field testing? Well, primarily for glaucoma. We also can assess neurological defects, macular degeneration, toxic retinopathy, and there is applications for plastic surgery as well, and etc. And while objective testing is certainly very important to the overall ocular assessment, objective testing doesn't tell us everything about function, and that's where visual fields come in. And at times we can actually detect visual field defects before we detect optic nerve damage. And visual field testing is essential for assessing severity and progression of disease, and it gives the clinician more information for making decisions regarding treatment. So what can we do with this visual field? Well, I can tell you that you can certainly do more than screening. It's a common misconception. Well, let's start by taking a look at the different test patterns that you can do with the Easyfield. So we do have a 10-2 pattern for central vision testing. We have a 24-2 primarily used for general screening. And then we have a 30-2 test pattern usually used when doing threshold testing. And then we do have the ability to create a custom test pattern as well, up to 30 degrees, and these are all of the available points that you would be able to create a custom test pattern with. And you might ask, well, why would I want to create a custom test pattern? And just as an example, one of the common requests that we get for custom test patterns is a ptosis test. So these are patients that are being referred to ophthalmologists and optometrists from plastic surgeons in order to assess the medical need for blepharoplasty. And as you can see here, we have a superior field test, one that was a baseline test to assess the amount of obstruction in the visual field caused by the upper lid, and then another test with the upper lid taped in order to simulate the improvement due to blepharoplasty. So I did say that the Easyfield is more than a screener, but it does certainly work well as screening. For a screening, we have our supra-threshold strategies, which are our screening strategies, and they're appropriate for general screening and neurological defects. The most common strategies that are used for screening are going to be the super-threshold 2-zone strategy and the super-threshold 3-zone strategy. Both of these tests take approximately a minute with normal patients. The 3-zone test, this does give you more information. The drawback is it does take a little bit longer if you have a patient with visual field defects. So here's examples of the super-threshold 2-zone and the super-threshold 3-zone test. With the 2-zone, you have 2 possible outcomes, normal or below normal. The open box indicating normal and the closed box indicating below normal. With the super threshold 3-zone test, we have 3 possible outcomes. We have normal, we have X indicating relative defect, and then we have a closed box indicating absolute defect. So, and again, with normal patients, both of these tests take about 1 minute. And with the pathological patient, the super threshold 3-zone will take a little more time. I would say that the 2-zone is definitely more popular simply because if the doctor finds a defect on the 2-zone, they will just go to a threshold strategy. So we do have a macula test for testing central vision. The macula test uses a 10-2 test pattern with a threshold strategy. And this is appropriate for detecting and documenting pathologies affecting central vision, such as age-related macular degeneration. The macula test can also be used for Plaquenil screening. In 2011, the American Academy of Ophthalmology published revised recommendations on screening for Plaquenil. And the recommendations were that a 10-2 threshold test be done, and in conjunction with an objective test such as spectral domain OCT. Generally, when Plaquenil screening, there's a baseline examination that is conducted, and then annual follow-up. So just some statistics here to illustrate the importance of visual field testing. An estimated 80 million people worldwide will have glaucoma in 2020, and 11 million of them will be blind in both eyes. A 2004 study estimated that 2.7 million Americans had glaucoma, and only half of them were aware that they had it. One of the common challenges in practice are educating patients on the importance of regular eye exams and regular visual field testing, partially due to some misinformation out there. So here's actually an extract from some educational material that Oculus provides. On the left side, we see the normal patient's view. In the middle, we see the common textbook illustration of a visual field defect showing a black spot right in the middle of the patient's visual field. And however, we know that this is not realistic. A more realistic illustration is here on the right, where there's no apparent scotoma from the patient's point of view. And in early glaucoma, the patient usually is unaware, and this is why visual fields testing and regular eye exams are so important. So for glaucoma suspects and glaucoma progression, the Easyfield offers several threshold strategies. We have a full threshold strategy, which uses a 4-2 stepping method or staircase method. This is kind of the long time gold standard. We have an improved algorithm, the fast threshold strategy, which decreases examination time. Now, the full threshold strategy takes about 7 to 8 minutes, and it has some variability depending on patient response times and visual field defects. The fast threshold, again, has a better algorithm, and this decreases examination time to about 5.5 to 6.5 minutes, approximately. And then we have a strategy that's unique to Oculus perimeters, our SPARC strategy, which decreases examination time to approximately 3 minutes per eye. So just to look a little closer at SPARC, SPARC is a complete reproducible threshold examination, which takes about 3 minutes per eye again. SPARC is fine-tuned for glaucoma, and SPARC was built based on a database of 90,335 exams. So just to kind of give you a simplified idea of how SPARC works and why it's so fast, initially we take threshold values at 6 strategic test locations based on where the nerve fiber bundles are in the retina. And based on those 6 locations, we can estimate what the rest of the visual field will look like. And at given locations, it was found that based on these initial 6 locations, we can determine the threshold at a given location with a standard error of 3.5 decibels, approximately 3.5 decibels. So this is the first phase of the exam, and it takes about 40 seconds. Again, that was just the first phase of the exam. In the second, third, and fourth phase of the exam, all remaining locations are tested. And the reason it's so fast is each new location is tested based on the estimation and the likely error of the phase before it. And this gives us a threshold test in, again, 3 minutes. So the benefits of SPARC are that it's twice as fast, allowing you to do twice as many examinations in the same amount of time. The examination time is independent of the patient, so whether you have a normal patient or whether you have a pathological patient, the test time is still about 3 minutes. SPARC is very repeatable. SPARC has approximately 40% less fluctuation than full threshold strategies, which makes SPARC ideal for progression analysis. There's always that question of whether this progression is due to chance or whether this is true progression. And SPARC helps to eliminate some of this variability. Take a very quick look at the visual field results. This is going to be similar to almost any visual field, whether it's from Oculus or from other manufacturers. So we have maps showing the threshold values as well as a grayscale map. There's actually several different options for this grayscale map depending on how you're accustomed to seeing the grayscale or the patterns scale. We have deviation from age-related normals will give you a numeric value as well as a probability. A corrected deviation, same thing, will give you numeric values as well as probability. This corrected deviation maps are useful for cases of cataract. The defect curve. And I'll take a look at some of the global indices here. We have our mean sensitivity, mean deviation or generalized defect, and then pattern standard deviation or localized defect. One of the common questions that we get is, well, at what point does the mean deviation become significant? Or at what point does the pattern standard deviation become significant? And the answer is actually right there on the report. We have a Bressini glaucoma staging system right there, and the glaucoma staging system takes both the mean deviation and the pattern standard deviation into consideration and automatically gives us a class on the visual field. The classes are 0 being normal, borderline, and then we have stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 glaucoma. And then this will also indicate whether the visual field defects were more generalized or whether the visual field defects were more localized. In this example, this is a stage 4 glaucoma classification and a mixed result. So another program that we have for glaucoma classification and risk assessment is Glaucoma Staging program. This is pattern recognition. This was developed by glaucoma experts using approximately 2,200 patient records. Take a look at this one. Here we have a patient that clearly has some visual field defects, and we'll see what the GSP actually tells us. So the GSP gives us a visual field class, and then it also gives us risks. So it's telling us, first it looks at the visual field pattern and decides whether this visual field pattern has a stronger correlation with neurological fields, glaucomatous fields, artifactual fields, or normal fields. And in this case, you can see it says that this particular visual field has a very strong correlation with glaucoma, glaucomatous fields. And then if you have a glaucomatous pattern or a normal pattern, you will also get a risks field here. And this is going to be very similar to the visual field class, where it's going to take a look at this pattern and decide on whether the pattern has a stronger correlation with normal visual fields, suspect or pre-parametric fields, or if it has a stronger correlation with mild, moderate, or severe glaucoma. And then we actually get a glaucoma likelihood index value here on a scale from 0 to 5, and it's color-coded to make it easy. So if you have a normal visual field, you'll have a green number here, and it'll be between 0 and 1. And then if you have a suspect or a pre-parametric field, you'll have a yellow number here. And then if it's a glaucomatous field, then you'll have a red number here. And here's an example that maybe shows really the value of GSP. Here's a patient with a fairly normal visual field. And as you can see down here, the VF class says that it strongly correlates with normal fields. But in the risks assessment here, it tells us that this particular visual field pattern has a very strong correlation with other visual fields in patients that had pre-parametric glaucoma or had functional damage that just don't have visual field defects yet. It's, and so this is a patient that is at risk, and this is a patient that you would suggest regular follow-up, regular eye exams. So we do have a progression analysis software. We call it Threshold Noiseless Trend. So the TNT evaluates objectively the changes over time in visual field results. Displays a concise report of progression. It presents a prediction about the expected visual field for a chosen patient age. And we get a comprehensive printout with an overview of all examinations taken into account. So here's what the TNT looks like. We get a main report here at the top of the main report based on the indices below, which I don't have quite enough time to really go into what these indices actually mean. But at the top here, we will get several possible answers. One is no significant change, to suspected progression, confirmed progression, or if you have an unusual improvement in visual field results, it will say possible learning effect. We get a cumulative gray map with exam selection. So this actually puts all of the patient's exams into chronological order. And the TNT is a smart software. It automatically excludes examinations for learning effects. And as the user, you have the ability to manually override the computer's decision. You also have the ability to exclude examinations that, for whatever reason, you don't feel were reliable. We have the defect curves. So this is always going to show the change in defect curves from the oldest examination to the newest examination. And then it does have a significant change map, which showing significant change in all locations. The lighter gray means no significant change. The darker gray means moderate change, and then the black is very significant change, and these black with the X on it, that is a deep scotoma, so that's not getting any worse. And then lastly here on the TNT display, as mentioned before, we can look at prognosis, so we can plug in a future age here, and based on the patient's current age and their current rate of progression will give us an estimated visual field. And this is a good tool for patient education and hopefully patient compliance. So in conclusion, the OCULUS Easyfield gives us fast and reliable strategies. The super threshold strategies or screening strategies, we have our traditional threshold strategies and the very fast, very repeatable SPARC precision test. We have test patterns for testing central vision, screening glaucoma testing or glaucoma suspect and progression testing, as well as we can make custom test patterns to suit your individual needs. We have several tools for risk assessment and automatic classification of glaucoma, including our Brusini Enhanced Glaucoma Staging System and the Glaucoma Staging Program, or as we call it, GSP. And then the last thing we talked about is our comprehensive glaucoma progression analysis, the threshold noiseless trend. So this will conclude the features and benefits portion of the webinar tonight. And so at this point, I'd like to pass the torch and welcome Mr. Rob Rebello to talk about visual field reimbursement and ICD-10. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to thank you for joining us. I am going to spend a few minutes on further following up with some of Chris's discussion about billing visual fields, and then I'm going to get into the topic that's on everybody's mind, ICD-10. One of the things that Chris was talking about was on visual field. What we're really looking at is not just using it when you have a diagnosis. Chris did mention about screening. What we really emphasize is also use this device and your other devices too in a screening mode. If you have suspicions, we realize that you cannot bill a certain procedure if you only think something's going on or if you're looking for something. However, a number of times, and Chris had a number of examples about that, about the different things that you can find when you are looking for using your instrumentation accordingly. And it is appropriate because then, even if you're not billing the procedure, it's not costing you all that time much money. But for those cases where it actually shows you some indication, whether it's glaucoma suspect, or some other issue with that device, that now you can start billing that patient medically. And that's a significant increase in reimbursement. Because if you have a patient that's there only for refraction, you really want to move them into that medical mode and get that increased reimbursement. What I'm showing you here is on this screen, on this screen where in AICore we've actually pulled up Visual Field Extended and look at the diagnosis codes that are supported by that support an extended visual field. One of the things that when I did a count of this, this is one particular region of the country, and it does vary by region, but pretty much they're the same in this type of scenario. And there are actually over 500 different diagnosis codes that support visual fields. So I'm just going to go through and here I've gone through the next screen and the next screen. This actually skips to the very bottom. But again, there are over 500 diagnosis codes that support visual field. As a result of that, when you use your visual field, the device, now you can look for stuff. If you find it, you can see very quickly which the diagnosis are appropriate, and then it can be billed, and it will allow you to follow up for medical in the future. So one of the things that Chris mentioned was if you found the diagnosis code based on the Easyfield, now what you're looking at is, all right, I have a diagnosis. In this case, I've selected POAG. And now, for the next visit, you can actually bill all of these procedures medically. So, for example, you can do a fundus photo, a scanning laser, or OCT, for example, extended ophthalmoscopy, corneopachymetry, goniostomy, visual field, and then it goes on. We show also the actual exams that you can do, so that it really gives you a good background to move into the medical. I can't tell you how many times I've had doctors talk to me at my lectures or at different meetings about moving more into the medical, becoming more medical oriented. One of the best examples I have is a doctor that I met years ago, and he was a Walmart doctor, or is a Walmart doctor in West Virginia, and at the time he did absolutely no medical. And he used these tools and this type of thing to migrate, where now 75% of his patients are medical, and he's still in that Walmart location. So really, that migration to medical, your tools should be used for that, and the visual field is one example of that. One of the things that Chris showed you on there, also on the evaluation, was glaucoma suspect, where you had in that one of his last slides, where he actually showed a patient, and he did have a risk factor, even though some of the stuff was normal. Glaucoma suspect is an interesting diagnosis code. There are actually two. This one is 36501, which is low risk. There's also 36505, which is high risk. And you need to be careful, make sure that you code those appropriately, because they're starting to crack down on that. And it's not on the risk level or the severity of the glaucoma, because this is a glaucoma suspect. It's based on age, the ethnic background of the patient, how if they have the family history of glaucoma, and some other factors. And those are the things that determine whether it's low risk or high risk. The interesting thing is, even with glaucoma suspect, you can perform essentially the exact same procedures in glaucoma suspect patient that you can for a glaucoma patient. Notice the list that I have here for glaucoma suspect. It's essentially the same as this list, except for the post-op removal of the lens material, which makes sense, obviously, since this is just a post-op exam. So there are a number of procedures that now you can perform. So in other words, step one, you use the visual fields, you came up with a diagnosis. Now you can perform these other procedures based on that and track this patient and treat this patient medically. Let me give you some examples. So now we look at some of the things that I mentioned is with the help of the visual fields. Now you've identified this patient, and in this example, I've taken some of the things from that glaucoma suspect patient. So fundus photography, and it is or OCT. Remember, they're mutually exclusive. So unless I have two diagnosis codes that support it, I can only do fundus photo. But extended ophthalmoscopy, gonio, visual field, now you can bill for it, and an exam. And I just use that as one. There's multiple. So now you have, depending on your region, what your fees are, and whether or not you choose fundus photos and have them come back for OCT or just do OCT, whatever your choice is. But it's a significant increase in reimbursement, and it starts with using your instrumentation to get you going. So one of the other things is you start doing this now, even when, as I said, you can't bill the fields of the other procedure, you're finding diagnosis codes that you'll bill for follow-up exams, additional billing support procedures. So again, it becomes a significant increase in reimbursement. Chris, have you gotten any questions about this or your presentation that I should address?
Not at this point.
Okay. Now we'll get into the fun part, ICD-10. As you realize, or should realize by now, it is coming now exactly 1 month from today. It will be implemented. There's a lot of concern, and justifiably so. I've lectured all over the country about ICD-10. It is something that unfortunately, we see a lot of practices that think their systems are prepared, but in fact, their systems are not ready. Let's talk about the construction of ICD-10. I took out a number of my slides because it's a late time at the evening. Everybody's worked all day. It's even later for me on the East Coast, but it is something that you really need to be going through. So we're going to have a summary type thing. H00 through H59 are for eyes. H60 to 99 are actually ears. So for the normal medical issues, it's H and then some two-digit code after that. So for example, H00 is lid, H10 is conjunctivitis, H40 is glaucoma. One of the changes with ICD-10, certain injury codes, such as corneal abrasion, corneal foreign body, conjunctival foreign body, all of those are now considered injury codes which use an S or a T not an H. So it separated out. So let's see how this gets constructed. H10 is conjunctivitis. So in this, you go from 1 point after the decimal, it starts to get more specific. And this is atopic conjunctivitis. And then the next digit specifies the right eye. This particular code has only 5 characters. That's not typical. Most of them have far more than that. But this one, you specified that it's conjunctivitis with the first 3 characters. The one after the decimal point is that it's acute atopic, and then finally the one in the end is a right eye. One of the things that varies considerably, and we just talked about this, is POAG. POAG previously, 36511 was 1 code, now it's 5. One of the things that we see is that this one is unique, and that is it's based on stage of the glaucoma, mild, moderate, severe. It does not, at this time, have an I modifier. That X in the next to the last position is a, quote, placeholder for I, but at the current time, it's not filled in. So if you try to use 0 through 9 for the I designation, you will have an invalid code. One of the other things I will talk about is the very first and the very last. Stage unspecified and indeterminate stage. Don't use them. One of the things we know is the payers will, if not immediately, very quickly, start denying unspecified diagnosis codes. I'll talk about it later again, but one of the problems that we see is a number of practice management EHR systems only have unspecified codes, so there's only one for every diagnosis ICD-9. Those are going to you will get failed on those. So you need to make sure that you're specifying the stage. Because there's no I designation, it doesn't matter whether it's unilateral or bilateral, and you will just specify what stage it is for that particular patient. Here's a more typical one. Here I have CSC as my diagnosis code. H2501 is cortical senile cataract or cortical age-related cataract now. And then the 1, 2, 3, and 9. It's right eye, left eye, bilateral, and unspecified. So 1 specifies the right eye, 2 is left eye, 3 is bilateral. Again, don't use the unspecified. Use the specific one, whether it's right, left, or both. Make sure that you stay in that type of a form. It'd be much more beneficial to you. Chris asked me why I had the blepharitis code in here. He was going through my slides. And I said, it's because it happens to be my most favorite ICD-10 code. So what I start with here is unspecified blepharitis. H01001, right upper lid, right lower lid, right eye unspecified, left upper lid, left lower lid, left eye unspecified eye, etc. The last one, unspecified blepharitis, unspecified eye, unspecified lid. If you use this code, you're in the wrong field. It's just one of the ridiculous particular things. Everything's unspecified. I can guarantee you that if not immediately, very quickly, that code's going to be denied when you try, if you ever try to bill it. So that's why I have this particular example in here. Here's another example. This is what I would consider the worst case scenario when you're trying to map something in a common sense mode from how you bill or code now with ICD-9 to how you're going to have to do it with ICD-10. So we have low tension glaucoma, and it is both eye and severity based. So I have, as you can see in front of you, the right eye, mild, moderate, severe, left eye, mild, moderate, severe, bilateral, etc. If you actually whittle it down, so it's only those codes that you should be using. In other words, get rid of all the unspecified, whether it's stage or eye, and now you end up with 9 instead of 30. You're going to have the right eye from mild to severe, left eye mild to severe, and bilateral mild to severe. but that's how it's expanded in with ICD-10, where you had one code before, and now you're going to have a choice between 9 different codes. One of the things that we get from our users with AICore constantly is questions about how I can use my, consider it a routing slip, fee slip, whatever, but where you have on there your ICD-9 codes, your procedure codes, and you circle both, and some people draw lines between them, etc. Obviously, when ICD-10 comes in, if not impossible, it's going to be extremely difficult to do. Refractive versus medical. This is one more confusing part about ICD-10. The location of the eye designation is not consistent. So that in cortical senile cataract, you can see where the eye designation is in that spot, but for myopia, it's in the second spot after the decimal point. And so it does, you have to be careful about this. This is one of the things I've seen in different courses, classes, etc., where a number of those codes that they end up with in the courses or classes are not correct. I mentioned this briefly. Many of the practice management EHR systems that we've talked to have told their users that they're ready, they have the ICD-10 codes. However, many of them are still not ready that I've talked to, and they only have put in a limited number of unspecified codes. When I asked them how the practices were going to get the difference, they said that was up to the practices. You have to make sure before you're into October and trying to bill that your EHR system, your practice management system, has the codes, has all the codes, and don't let them tell you that, oh, unspecified is okay or what we have is okay. Eventually, you're going to be denied with those codes. So be very careful. You need to make sure that you have all the codes available to you. Severity. Let's go back to that POAG example, or even with the low tension glaucoma. If the patient has in the glaucoma bilaterally and different severity levels, you would code the worst eye. Always code the worst eye. So it actually saves you on how much you have to code. So you don't have to, in the case of low tension glaucoma, code the low tension glaucoma, left eye moderate, right eye severe. You can simply code bilateral and severe. That's perfectly legitimate. So in this case, POAG OD is severe, moderate, OS. Then you would actually go through and code it this way. So it would be just one severe code. You don't have to do 2 codes. So it keeps it much simpler. Always code the worst eye. You do not have to replicate when severity is different. It's a major point because it can save you a lot of grief and aggravation. It does mean more work for the doctor. One of the things, because we also do practice audits, and one of the things that we see consistently when we do an audit for practice, look at their records, make sure they're correct, etc., is where you have to make sure that your diagnosis codes in your exam exactly match the way the claim is. One of the easiest ways with ICD-9, you actually could simply write as a diagnosis POAG, and the code, the billing new to code 36511. Now you have to be more specific so that your billing people can pick it up properly. And that is, in this case, if it's POAG, you also have to make sure you identify the stage of the glaucoma so they can code it appropriately. Another example is cortical senile cataract, 36615, very easy to code. Now you have to make sure you're documenting whether it's OD, OS, or OU, so that the biller can code the proper case. In this case, I'm saying it's bilateral in this example, so there's a 3 in the last position. We've talked about this. One of the things that frustrates me is a number of the practice management systems vendors that I've talked to, this has been known for years. It's been scheduled. It was originally scheduled in this country 3 years ago. It was deferred till last year and then deferred again. It is scheduled for October of next year. When I was lecturing at the beginning of the year, people would say, is it going to get denied again? It's always been denied several months before. And then especially with the AMA and CMS reaching an agreement on ICD-10 implementation, and now we're a month away, it's going to happen. One of the things about help, we'll talk about courses. I've attended several courses, including a couple from the different major national organizations for optometry and ophthalmology. And I've seen paid self-study courses. One of the things in several of the courses where I've been a participant, or not presenter, but sitting in the audience for an ICD-10 course, and then having the presenter go through the manuals, start out with the alphabetical, then move to the index, and then go through this, and then say, okay, now we're going to add the I designation, etc. And then when they're all said and done, 20 minutes after they started with a single ICD-10 code, they had the wrong code. Another example is the paid courses. We actually received this flyer from a company advertising they had ICD-10 training, and here, as you can see, a sample of the new coding. Well, there's only one major problem. Every single one of those is incorrect. They are wrong. So you have to be careful. It's just, there's just so much stuff out there that's just incorrect. It's just garbage. One of the things I will tell you, there is a very simple solution. When you go through and you use AICore and you look up your diagnosis code, you can look up a diagnosis code in AICore by ICD-9 code, by description, by eye segment or injury or illness, and we automatically, instantaneously pop up the exact ICD-10 codes. So in this case, you see up top the ICD-9 code, 36511, and then I'm highlighting, and it's mild, moderate, and severe. Instantly, right in front of you, no second guessing, no extra steps. Here in this case, cortical senile cataract, since we've been using that a lot, and then again, you look it up, and immediately we're going to show you, I didn't highlight them, but it's OD, OS, OU. So you can see exactly what the code is. You know it's much, much simpler. Our users that have been using AICore for years, they've seen, we've had ICD-10 for about 4 years now. And our users tell us they're not the least bit afraid. It's so simple. It's very easy to use. And it immediately comes up with the exact particular ICD-10 code. No waste of time, no extra steps. More importantly, no manuals to buy. It's very, very simple. This was, because of time constraints, etc., a basic introduction to ICD-10. I didn't want to spend a lot of time on it because of the lateness of the night. However, if you go to our website, AICore.com, on your own, you don't have to be a user, you can do it, no obligation, and there's an ICD-10 video that goes into much, much more detail. So with that, Chris, I'll ask you now, or the attendees, if you have any questions, now is the time to do it.